You know, there's been a lot of talk today about data and about measurement and about how we deliver work to people. And I'm not going to talk about that because I'm really going to talk about the spark that we need to create great ideas, because there's no point in measuring and chasing people around unless the ideas are really great. And we can all get very sensible, and we can all get very sensible with our measurement, but unless our thinking is interesting and human and touches people, then we're going to get nowhere. So my talk, Why Madness Matters, is about looking for that spark, looking for the interesting idea, and what creative people in agencies and advertising agencies have to go through to find that spark. Now, I'm going to take you into a room, my office in 180 Amsterdam. And we're a pretty flat structure. We're not quite as flat as Forsman and Bodenfors, but we're pretty flat. And in the office, there's an account person, a planner, some creative teams, creative director, and we've got two ideas on the table. We've got idea A, and it's presented by a team who are kind of really experienced, and they've managed to tick all the boxes of the client brief, and it looks really solid, this idea. And the account person is really kind of stoked about it. They want to take it to the client. They know they want to get it into production. The planner looks at it and says, we can justify this idea. This is a really cool idea. Idea B is presented by a kind of more junior team, and it doesn't quite tick all the boxes. And it's not quite as right, but it's more interesting. And we're kind of, with the group, when we look at it, we go, what idea should we have? Should we have the idea that's right or the idea that's interesting? Because sometimes doing it right is getting it wrong. Because sometimes when we're very, very sensible, we end up capturing nobody. And Mark Pritchard said this recently. Now, Mark Pritchard is the chief brand officer of P&G, and he said there's an exponential amount of crap being pumped out to consumers, and we need to get back to great ideas. I feel like sometimes with the amount of work that we have to create, we're having this descent into sensible because we're looking at everything and we're kind of honing it, taking the edges off it. And really what we've got to look for as in an industry is an ascent into madness. Now I'm going to draw some parallels here of people outside marketing. I'm going to draw some parallels from the world of entertainment and look at people there. I'm going to look at people from the world of sport and the world of design. And we're kind of, let's have a look at what they're doing and see if it can kind of inspire us. First up, Will Smith. Being realistic is the most commonly traveled road to mediocrity. I think that's really true. There's a sense of realism. We actually have to be unrealistic about what we want to achieve. And this man's a very unrealistic man. Not only is he up to his shoulders in a river, he's actually filming his masterpiece, Francis Ford Coppola, filming his masterpiece, Apocalypse Now, in the Philippines in the 1970s. And he was completely unrealistic. He was filming for 18 months in the Philippines in the middle of the jungle. And a feature film today only takes really 6 weeks to shoot. And the reason why is because this man had a heart attack during filming. And his name's Martin Sheen, and he was the lead actor in the film. And they couldn't film for 3 months. And a typhoon came to blew down his set as well during the filming. And then Marlon Brando, who took $1 million advance during the filming, turned up 30 pounds overweight and hadn't even read the script. And Francis Ford Coppola said this. He said, whenever you get into trouble, keep going. Do a 180-degree turn. Turn the situation halfway around. Don't look for the secure solution. Don't pull back from the passion. Turn it on full force. He surrounded himself with madness. He surrounded himself. People got so concerned when they read this that Warner Brothers, who had funded the film, got hold of John Milius, here's John Milius, who wrote the original screenplay and said, you have to go to the Philippines and talk sense into Francis. And this is what happened when Milius met Francis in the middle of the jungle.
Who knows what Francis had put together? And they brought me back to put the script back together. And everybody said, thank God he's returned to reason. Thank God this will be all right now. This is a new day. You know, this thing will finally be released. And they said, go in there and tell him that he's been crazy and all this kind of stuff. And it was like, I felt like von Rundstedt going to see Hitler, you know, in 1944, and I was going to be telling him there was no more gasoline on the Eastern Front and the whole thing was going to fold, you know. And I came out an hour and a half later, and he had convinced me that this was the first film that would win a Nobel Prize, you know. And so I came out of the room like von Rundstedt, we can win, you know. And, you know, we don't need gasoline. He had completely turned me around, you know. I would have done anything.
I think that goes to show, you know, if you have a crazy ambition, if you have a mad ambition, and his ambition was to win a Nobel Prize, to make a film that was an anti-war statement that he could win the Nobel Peace Prize. If we have that ambition in our everyday jobs, then maybe we'll win some Dubai links. Maybe we'll win something here. And now this leads me on to my anatomy of madness, or the origin of great ideas. Now, I've got 4 chapters to this that I'd like to explore with you this afternoon. Now, the first we've touched on, ambition. Now, when I first started as a copywriter, it was quite a few years ago now, I used to work in a London agency, and I used to sit in this glass box, and there was a kind of frosted bit of glass, and there was a little bit of clear glass at the bottom of my office. And I used to work with this account guy, and he used to wear pink socks and brown loafers. And I always knew it was him before he got into the office, because I'd see these pink socks and brown loafers walking past my glass door. And every time I got a kind of radio ad or I got a print ad because I was a junior, I used to think, let's reinvent radio. Let's reinvent print. I'd write the work with my partner, and I would write the work. It would get sent over to the account guy, because it was quite old-fashioned in those days, advertising. And sure enough, on that bit of glass below, the pink socks would appear in the brown loafer. And he burst into the room and goes, come on, lads. What are you trying to do reinvent the wheel? And I thought, that's exactly what we should be doing, reinventing the wheel. And the first person I'd like to talk about today is a man who actually did reinvent the wheel. He was a design student in the 1970s. And he looked at the wheel, and he thought this could really do with some reinventing, and particularly wheels on wheelbarrows. Wheels on wheelbarrows are horribly flawed. They get stuck in sand, they get stuck in mud, the wheelbarrow tips over when you hit rocks. How could you reinvent something so fundamental as the wheel? A ball. It was just such a simple idea that it kind of captured the imagination, and he actually came up with this amazing invention. He went on to look at the world around us, and he reinvented many other things. He reinvented the vacuum cleaner, and he also reinvented, now, if anybody's been to a public restroom in the last 5 years, you'll know what this. Yes, he reinvented the hand dryer, and he got us all doing this. And this is James Dyson. And James Dyson was turned down by every single manufacturing firm with his ideas. And he had to start his own company. He was an outsider with just brilliant thinking. And he had this ambition to keep on going and going. And this is a little bit about him talking about what it's like to be an artist in a world full of scientists.
Some people come to inventing by being a scientist, and that's brilliant. I'm the other sort, I'm an artist, but I understand the value of invention, and I'm willing to try something very different, to do the wrong thing, wrong thinking. A scientist might have difficulty doing wrong thinking, so scientists will tend to think the right way of doing something. The advantage I have is that all my thinking is wrong thinking. And so I start from a different point. And starting from a different point is interesting, because the first thing you do is have a failure, a terrific failure, because it's the wrong thing. But in that learning process, why is that failed? I start on a different track. My track's a very different track to his track. Now, sometimes it'll be a complete failure and I'll fail, but sometimes it sets me on a track which actually succeeds.
The next chapter, so wrong thinking. Wrong thinking can be right thinking. The next chapter is vision. Now, I wouldn't be in Dubai without mentioning Dubai, actually, as a place which has grown out of incredible vision. But I'm not going to talk about that today, because it will be a bit like there's a phrase, bringing coals to Newcastle, because everybody actually knows about vision here, and this city is probably going to be the most technologically advanced city in the world at some point. I'm going to talk about a young designer who actually graduated from Newcastle Polytechnic in 1989, and he went down to London and he got a job in a design firm called Tangerine. And he got this brief to design a toilet and a bidet. And he went at it with everything he had within him. And he reinvented came up with a radical new idea on what a toilet and bidet could be. And then Tangerine, they took it to their client, Ideal Standard, one of the biggest bathroom manufacturers of the time. And our young designer was there, and he was giving it all in his pitch. His dynamic, beautifully designed toilet. A toilet that of the future. And the managing director of Ideal Standard stood up and said, "I'm not hearing any more of this. This is far too futuristic for us and way too expensive." He'd had enough. Our young designer that was enough. He decided to give up. He decided that he was going to leave the UK and he was going to move to California and take his thinking with him, take his vision, because what he wanted to do was design for humanity. He went on from toilets, he went on to design the iPod, the iPad, the iPhone, the iMac, and it's Johnny Ive. And he had the same vision all that time ago when he designed what is now considered the iToilet to the iPhone 7. And here's Johnny, and there's a little clip of him talking about his approach to design and how it's all about humanity. It's all about designing for people.
One of the things that you get a sense of is the degree of care.
Yeah.
How much did this group of people care to make this and make it right? And they didn't do it for themselves. It's in service to the people that are going to use or buy the product. And I think there's something, the humanity of that, I think, is extraordinary. Mm-hmm. But I do think, as Mark was saying, how something's finished on the inside. You can argue that you'll never see that. Yeah. But I think we believe, and it's very difficult to explain why, but I think part of the human condition is that we sense care. Yeah. And sometimes it's easier to realize you sense carelessness. And I think, we're surrounded, our manufactured environment, so much of it, testifies to a complete lack of care, which isn't whether, that's not about your attitude towards an object. It's about your attitude to each other.
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of commitment and passion, and it can become a fanaticism of just really caring to get something right, whether you're going to see it or not. But we do that for each other.
Dedication, the third chapter in today's Anatomy of Madness. Now, we all have to be dedicated to great work. There is no doubt with that. I worked with teams for many, many years, and the best work is actually created by the teams who are most dedicated to it. But the person I'm going to talk about today is this 9-year-old boy. And he was sitting at home in his front room one day in Bromley in South London, and his father walked through the door with a stack of 7-inch singles. Now, 7-inch singles, to those of you who've grown up in the digital revolution, are records made of vinyl that you play, and they have a song on each side. And he listened to a particular song by Little Richard called Tutti Frutti, and the 2 minutes, 45 seconds of that song changed this young lad's life. He decided from that moment on he wanted to be a musician. And he would dedicate his life from the age of 9 to do that. He immediately learnt the guitar and the washboard, because that's what people did in those days. And then he went on to form several bands, the first being the Conrads, and it was a kind of pop band. They got a record deal. You would have thought they'd made it. They released a record, no one bought it, for the simple reason it was crap. He joined another band called the Manish Boys, and again, they released a record, and it didn't go anywhere, and for the simple reason it was just a bit ordinary. But then finally, he got a great break to join the band at the time, the Small Faces, and this is a picture of him when he's kind of 10 years older, and he's kind of a young man now, and he's got the haircut of the time that everybody expected you to have for being a musician. He was fitting in perfectly. And he joined the Small Faces, and then they asked him to leave the band because he listened to too much folk music. And he ended up being in the wilderness for 2 years. He ended up living in South London, not really doing anything very much, until he was in a Chinese restaurant one night, and he met his future wife, Angie. And Angie was really cool. She was a stylist, and she restyled him. And she said, "You don't have to be like everyone else. You can be different." This is him walking down the road in Bromley. Now, he's the one on the right. She's on the left. That's Angie on the left. Who knows what the child is wearing in the pram? But suddenly, he suddenly finds a voice, and he goes to the cinema and he watches 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick, and he gets inspired, and him and his writing partner, who he meets, Mick Ronson, they write a track together, and it suddenly is a hit. And then from then on, Angie has styled him, taken him out. He's not trying to mimic anybody else anymore. He's trying to be himself. And he becomes David Bowie. And he goes through this incredible journey of dedication from being inspired as a 9-year-old, trying to mimic as a teenager and a young man, to losing his way and then finding someone who can help take him into the next kind of generation, the next chapter of his life, and then finding himself and eventually becoming an artist. And David Bowie always said this thing, that he always did it for himself. And I think he was doing it for other people when he was failing, but he did it for himself when he was successful. And here's a little clip of him talking about his...
Never play to the gallery, I think. But you never learn that until much later on, I think. But never work for other people at what you do. Always remember that the reason that you initially started working was that there was something inside yourself that you felt that if you could manifest it in some way, you would understand more about yourself and how you coexist with the rest of society. And I think it's terribly dangerous for an artist to fulfill other people's expectations. I think they generally produce their worst work when they do that. And the other thing I would say is that if you feel safe in the area that you're working in, you're not working in the right area. Always go a little further into the water than you feel you're capable of being in. Go a little bit out of your depth. And when you don't feel that your feet are quite touching the bottom, you're just about in the right place to do something exciting.
I love that. Get a little bit out of your depth when your feet aren't quite touching the bottom, and that's where it gets exciting. Fearlessness. It's the fourth chapter. It's the fourth and final chapter of my Anatomy of Madness. Now, fearlessness is a really key thing, and I think you have to have it if you want to create great work. Now, I want to talk about someone who was in the world of sports, but actually became an icon, really, of the century, and that's Muhammad Ali. Now, I'll give you a very quick plotted history of Ali and this particular story and this relevance. You know, Ali became Olympic champion when he was very young. He went back to Louisville, Mississippi, and with his gold medal, and he tried to order some food in a segregated restaurant, and they wouldn't serve him. He walked out the restaurant and he threw his medal in the river. He then went on to beat Sonny Liston and became world boxing champion at a very young age. But then the Vietnam War was raging, and he was conscripted to fight, and he refused to, because he said, "I'm not going to fight in no white man's war." And so they revoked his boxing license which means he couldn't defend his world championship. And he ended up being in the wilderness for 7 years. Eventually, he got back. Eventually, he was allowed to fight again. He'd been 7 years out of the game and everything had moved on. And it was 1974, and he was going to fight George Foreman, who was one of the toughest, meanest, big-punching guys the planet had ever seen. And, you know, Ali was nervous. He was the outsider. From being the champion, he was now the outsider. And he gave this press conference at the Waldorf Astoria. And he gave this press conference where he just put that fear to one side. And he got the world to love Ali again.
It is befitting that I leave the game just like I came in, beating a big, bad monster who knocks out everybody and no one can whoop him. That's when that little Cassius Clay from Louisville, Kentucky came up and stopped Sonny Liston, the man who annihilated Floyd Patterson twice. He was going to kill me. But he hit harder than George. His reach was longer than George. He was a better boxer than George. And I'm better now than I was when you saw that 22-year-old undeveloped kid running from Sonny Liston. I'm experienced now, professional. Jaw's been broke, been lost, knocked down a couple of times. I'm bad. Been chopping trees. I done something new for this fight. I done wrestled with an alligator. That's right. I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail. That's bad. Only last week, I murdered a rock, injured a stone, hospitalized a brick. I'm so mean, I make medicine sick.
Bad dude.
Bad.
Ain't no doubt.
Fast. Last night, I cut the light off in my bedroom, hit the switch, was in the bed before the room was dark.
Incredible.
Fast.
Incredible.
And you, George Foreman, all of you chumps are gonna bow when I whoop him. All of you. I know you got him. I know you got him picked, but the man's in trouble. I'm gonna show you how great I am. So you wait, George.
I want to leap forward now from Ali. Oh, by the way, he won the fight, and he became world champion again, and he went on to become world champion 3 times, and I think that's the first time anybody has ever done that. I want to now move forward to the refugee crisis, and this is still on the kind of chapter of fearlessness. Now, it's been raging now for many years, and it's been a huge story around the world. And, you know, these headlines were from 2015, and, you know, this is kind of the reaction that's been provoked about this has been very polarized and mixed, and it's been very difficult for European countries to make things happen, and it's a very awkward, difficult situation. Now, in the middle of this, we started working with UNICEF, and our LA office created some work that won the Grand Prix at Cannes last year for Fairy Tales, and Amsterdam created something that was a story of 2 refugees, 80 years apart, that were of different religions, who told the same story. And UNICEF, we shot it and everything for UNICEF, and they looked at it and they said, yeah, it's really great. And it immediately went on the shelf for several months. And we're like, when's this film going to be released? It's a really important film. This is a really important issue. We need to do something. And then this man stepped in. Because on Holocaust Memorial Day, this man signed an executive order banning travel from 7 countries, mainly Muslim countries, to the Middle East. And UNICEF needed a response. They needed something. They needed to get courage. And they actually found that fearlessness, and they picked this film off the shelf, and they put it out on their social networks and played it out on broadcast. And here's the film that we made for UNICEF.
It was a happy childhood, but I could feel what was happening around me. One morning I woke up, the shops had been ransacked, all the windows were smashed, and my school had been burned.
الصوت كان كتير عالي، كل البيت كان عم يهز، كان كتير قريب الصوت، الناس كانت عم تصرخ وتركض، فكتير عالم انقتلت وماتت.
My mother said I had to go. I didn't want to leave her. But she said we would meet again soon. She must have known that she would never see me again.
كان قرار إنه موت ولا عيش. أنا وأخوي هربنا لحالنا، نمنا بالشارع، بالبساتين، بالحدائق، وين ما يصح لنا.
They brought us to a refugee camp. We had hardly any food.
الرجال كانوا حاطيننا بقارب صغير، كان لشخصين أو 3، بس نحنا كنا 12. بأي لحظة كان ممكن يقلب.
Planes flew over us and gunned our boat. I dived and hid under a raft.
كان كتير عتم، ما قدرت لاقي أخوي. بلش صرخ بشار بشار.
I've never been more scared in my whole life. I thought I was going to die.
قضينا 10 أيام بالمي.
I thought about my family the whole time.
أكتر شي اشتقت له هو أمي.
We were waiting to know our fate. Well, thankfully, they let us in.
كنا كتير مبسوطين لما وصلنا آخر شي.
I'm alive.
أنا عايش، أنا
I
واحد
am
من
one of the
المحظوظين.
lucky ones.
So the film was released and it was watched by millions and millions of people. Celebrities picked up on it, shared it, and you know, it's something that UNICEF found the courage to put out there, and it was a very bold statement. Now, the anatomy of madness. We have ambition, vision, dedication, and fearlessness, and with these things, I believe that we can have the origin of great ideas. We need to have them in varying amounts with everything we do, but we've got to look for these. These should be our checklist, our boxes we tick, and the creativity that we create for our clients. So when we go back to idea A or idea B, I'll let you make up your mind which one it should be and decide for yourselves, because, you know, should we be right or should we be interesting? And finally, that quote, that Francis Ford Coppola quote, whenever you get into trouble, keep going, do a 180-degree turn, turn the situation halfway around, don't look for the secure solution, don't pull back from the passion, turn it on full force. This quote inspired 180, and actually the 180 that comes from it inspired our whole agency to name itself 180. And this is our boardroom, our boardroom, yes, exactly that, where we present work in Amsterdam. Thank you very much.